Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for joining this evening and for having us into the Portland Psychedelic Society community. Super stoked to be here. We'll do quick introductions. I'll begin with myself, and then I'll call on folks that are here from the Plant Medicine Alliance board to do a brief intro. I'm Nathan Howard. Yeah, super grateful to be here. Feel very privileged to be in these conversations with you all. Born and raised in Southeast Portland, and have had some of the most meaningful moments of my life with plant medicines, and it has put me really into conversation with you all today, and has turned me into as much as I can a volunteer in various efforts to kind of liberate plant medicines and people who work with them. And yeah, really love the work we've been doing at the Plant Medicine Healing Alliance for the past coming up on a year. And I think I'll leave it at that. And I'll call on folks. And then if you can unmute yourself and do a brief introduction, that would be lovely. I'm going to start with Dr. Angela Carter.
Hi, everyone. I'm so glad to see you all here tonight. Thank you for coming. My name is Angela Carter. I use they, them pronouns. I am a naturopathic physician in Portland. I've been in service to the queer and trans community with primary care for the last 10 years. I just started my new job, very excited, as the program director for Measure 110. So I will be managing the program and working with the Oversight and Accountability Board to create the substance use recovery and treatment programs that we'll have in the state, and to inform law enforcement of what they need to know and all of the many different things. I'm also on the Oregon Psilocybin Advisory Board, and I'm just grateful to be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Carter. And goodbye, Peter. Thanks for the note in the chat. Let's go to Pilar up next.
Good evening, everyone. I am an immigrant, and I'm Pilar Hernandez Wolf. I am an immigrant, and I identify as cisgender, Latina, and able-bodied. I am a descendant of the doctrine of discovery, a descendant of indigenous peoples whose lands were stripped by a papal bull that declared them not human and not worthy of any rights. This left my ancestors with the great forgetting. I am a mestiza born in Colombia. I am the living mix of indigenous and Southern European peoples who came to our lands to take and to rape. This is what cultural genocide looks like. Healing for me has come through remembering and reconnecting to living and ancient roots, as I have been able to have access to the traditions of the peoples of the land that is called Colombia today. I'm also a professor, I'm a scholar, and a mental health professional, and I am in service to, as much as I can, to Mother Earth. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Michelle. Christensen, that is.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Michelle Christensen. I use she, her, hers pronouns. I'm a psychotherapist, trauma specialist, shamanic practitioner. I've been in practice for 25 years, but recently I also accepted the role of lead curator at Heart of the Rose, which is a nonprofit community church that is dedicated to offering community programs to promote health and spiritual well-being for everyone. It is my heartfelt mission to support and cultivate community practices for healing. I personally advocate for the right and the religious freedom to provide safe, inclusive spaces where groups are allowed to gather for healing work, given the expertise and guidance provided by indigenous elders and wisdom keepers. I'm really so grateful to be here with all of you tonight. Thank you all for organizing this beautiful, wonderful event. Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. Claudia Puentes. Hello.
Hello, everybody. My name is Claudia Puentes. I am an immigrant from Peru. I was born and raised there and came at age 18 here to the United States. My lineage comes from, I'm a mestizo woman, a mix of indigenous and Spaniard. My family comes from the lineage of the Aymara people in the Titicaca Lake of Peru. I am a marriage and family therapist. I am a trauma specialist, and I am deeply committed to continue the education of the intersectionality of generational trauma, plant medicine science, eco-informed therapy, nervous system healing, and indigenous knowledge. It is an honor to be here with all of you. I've been for the last 10 years as a therapist working with BIPOC communities and underserved communities in California, here in Oregon, and in Peru. And I'm also an artist, a musician, and I do believe that this work is completely connected with the art of the spirit and the art of healing. I believe healing is an art, and it is an honor to be here with all of you in endeavoring in these incredible times together as a circle. Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much, Claudia. Rebecca Martinez. Your porch looks lovely.
Thank you. Welcome to my porch. Hi, everybody. Thank you for having us tonight. My name is Rebecca Martinez. I am a Chicana queer woman, mother, writer, community organizer. I was born in Portland, Oregon, and grew up in St. Helens, for those who know the Columbia River. I am also the co-founder of Fruiting Bodies Collective. A lot of our work has to do with holding the rollout of Measure 109 accountable and making sure that there is plenty of space for queer and BIPOC involvement, and with the larger goal of ultimately broad drug policy reform. And so it's just a major joy to be a part of the Plant Medicine Healing Alliance and be chipping away at that goal together. A lot of my healing came from unlearning Pentecostal evangelical Christianity and healing from that spiritual trauma, as well as recovering from police violence that affected my family about 5 years ago. So psilocybin specifically is very close to my heart, and I think there's a lot of magic to be shared here together. Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Rebecca. Okay, we're closing in on our group, but we got a few left. Got Dr. Rachel Knox up next.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Dr. Rachel Knox. I'm a family and integrative medicine physician by training. For the past 6 years, though, I've specialized in cannabinoid medicine and endocannabinology, in the broad ways that plant medicines and practices, we call it cannabimetic practices, work on what we consider the biopsychosocial spiritual model of medicine, the endocannabinoid dome. But also for the past 5 years, I've been involved in policy reform and regulation of cannabis. I spent 3 years as the chair of the Oregon Cannabis Commission, where I helped create a few subcommittees that I continue to work with today, principally the Health Equity Subcommittee to the Oregon Cannabis Commission. Since I could no longer serve as chair when I was selected to join the Psilocybin Advisory Board. So I do co-chair with Dr. Carter, the Equity Committee to the Psilocybin Advisory Board. I still serve the city of Portland on the Cannabis Policy Oversight Team there. And I'm a co-founder of the Cannabis Health Equity Movement and Association for Cannabis Health Equity in Medicine, where we recognize, cannabis as what we call a root tool to solving socio-ecological and medical disparities in community. while recognizing the real emphasis here is understanding, for me, this endocannabinoid system, which provides us a pretty clear roadmap on how to apply all the things that contribute to our well-being when we understand how the endocannabinoid system works with our ecology. To sum up the heart of my work and my role in policy and regulation, I care very much that policies and regulations create equitable access to well-being. I think that is the role for policy and regulation only, and it cannot be a barrier to those things. And first order of business is to address health equity in the communities that have been most divested of that access. So I recognize the urgent need to ensure that policies and regulations as they come are created with equity at the center, at the destination, and that we create spaces, like Rebecca said, to ensure that those who have been most divested have a central role in making those policies and regulations. So glad to be here.
My name is Sarah Honeycutt, and professionally, I'm an economist. I've been working with plant medicines for the last 23 years, and in the last 8 years, I've really used them to heal early childhood trauma, and just really grateful and excited to be a part of this movement, and especially with respect to indigenous people, and they, them, and that's good for me.
Thanks so much, Sarah. All right, 2 more of our core advisors, and then for our general advisors, I'm going to ask if you all want to do intros, or I can paste your bios in there, so we don't spend too much time on intros, although they are very important. So we've got Karin and Mike, and I believe, are you 2 sharing a screen?
No, I wasn't able to get up to Portland today. I'm here in smoke-filled Ashland, Oregon. Should I go?
Yeah, please. Yeah.
Okay.
Brief background as one of our board of advisors.
Righto. Mike Mackey. I'm a native of Washington State, now resident here in Ashland, Oregon, and in Iquitos, Peru, where I'm co-founder of the Richard Evans Schultes Center for Amazonian Ethnobotanical Research, where we really focus on taking indigenous knowledge, bringing it into the 21st century, and in the process, honoring and compensating and working out the best possible balance in bringing these medicines to the world at large, and to the people, the mestizo in particular, people of the mid-Amazon basin where I work. My background here in the States was after 30 years of growing, distributing, and administering psilocybin mushrooms. I spent 3 years in federal prison, where I had the honor of being kind of a Peace Corps volunteer, and where my Native American blood enabled me to be pipe carrier in the weekly sweat lodge, which was the medicine that got us through those times. That's about it. There's more, of course, but thanks for you all being here.
Good evening. For the last 40 years, I've primarily worked in health and wellness, both as an entrepreneur and for nonprofits. Currently, I'm a research associate and a member of the SNAP lab here in Portland at OHSU. We're conducting some of the first research with MDMA and group therapy for PTSD. We're also conducting research with psilocybin in group therapy. I'm also a 5th generation Oregonian who grew up at a time in the late 60s here in the Willamette Valley. And I know too many people who have died and gone to prison because of our current laws. And I've seen too much suffering as a result of that as well. And so I'm here with my mission at this time in my life to support those who are carrying this work forward, so that we have the freedom to enjoy and take these medicines as we choose without being criminalized. That's really important to me. I want to extend my gratitude to my cohorts who have really worked with heart and care to collectively put together this initiative. And I would like to invite those who are listening, who are new to this evening, to really extend your voice within your own circle in your community to support us as a community and with cooperation to bring this initiative forward. Thank you.
That, Karen, thanks. Yeah, it's all of us together. Yeah, it's definitely nobody owns this. It's a community effort. Okay, we've got 3 folks, I believe, who are part of our general advisors, not the board of advisors, but are just as involved. I'm curious, Miriam, David, Dr. Labachi, are you up for giving brief bios, or are you feeling like we should mosey on to the next agenda item? I'd love to hear for you to offer a brief background.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Miriam Valat, and I am a soil biologist, actually, and an ecologist. And I serve as the still interim executive director of the Indigenous Peyote Conservation Initiative. And my bosses there are all Indigenous peyote practitioners who are involved in many different efforts to protect their way of life and their medicine sovereignty. And they have asked me to spend time with this group, which has been a very encouraging and supportive process to ensure that peyote is actually treated regulatorily separately from other plant medicines and entheogens and psychedelics, and that it's actually indigenous peyote people who drive any regulatory shifts or changes around peyote. And that's really for biocultural conservation, both ecological, managing the ecological threats to peyote, but also the cultural and sovereignty concerns that they have. So thank you, PMHA, to being a supportive group to work with on that front.
Thanks so much, Miriam. Let's save Dr. Labachi. But last but not least, so let's go next to David, if you're up for it.
Hello, everybody. Greetings from Ohlone Territory, Bay Area. My name is Beatrice Kai Labachi, but I usually go by my nickname, Bia. And I am executive director of the Chacruna Institute for Psychedelic Plant Medicines. So our nonprofit is named after Chacruna ayahuasca, one of the components, one of the main important recipes of ayahuasca. I have a PhD in anthropology, and I have studied ayahuasca, peyote, plant medicines, shamanism, ritual religion for the last 25 years. Tried psilocybin and peyote first time in Mexico 30 years ago. Have been drinking ayahuasca for 25 years. I'm passionate about these topics. I also have a job in MAPS and another one in CIIS, and we're trying to promote public education around psychedelic plant medicines and a kind of bridge between North and South, the world of shamanism, ritual religion, and the emergent field of psychedelic science, psychedelic assisted therapy. We're also engaged in creating diversity, equity, inclusion in the space and platforming voices that are normally excluded and marginalized, and curating conversations that are critical and reflexive. And I'm very much aligned with the Plant Medicine Healing Alliance, where I have the honor to sit on the advisory board. I think the vision and the spirit of this initiative is very much in tune with our own. As you can see, everybody here wants to make this movement move forward in mindful ways, in intentional ways, in ways that honor tradition, but are also aware of contemporary transformations and want to integrate this substances not only on people's lives, but on our culture, creating cultural frameworks that are meaningful and that manage this transition from stigma, prohibition, demonization, and all the circus that we see around our beloved plants into a more meaningful scenario that speaks to our hearts, our minds. And so I'm so honored. I immigrated to the United States 4 years ago, and it's great to be here. I love to be here. it's a crazy place, but I feel that we're doing a revolution. You know, I am so fond of Portland for carrying the flag. I feel it's true pioneer in a true pioneer era. And I'm very, very, you know, optimistic about the future of this movement, despite of all the negative forces. And I urge us to keep united and focused and, you know, help gear this together. I think it's a beautiful time to be alive, and glad to be here.
Mic drop. Thanks so much, Bia. Wow. Also, it really just struck me how bad I've been pronouncing your last name for the past 9 months. I'm sorry. And I now have a rubric to work from. Before we move on to, and thank you for that so much. Before we move on to Dr. Hernandez-Wolf to talk a little bit more about the actual work. Sorry, my dog just bit my partner. Or nibbled. Before we move on, we have David Bronner, who's driving. You okay giving a little background?
Yeah, thanks, Nathan. So, really psyched by this forum. Thank you for PPS and Evan and everyone who's organizing this. So I'm a Cosmic Engagement Officer at Dr. Bronner's. I'm on the board of MAPS. We're just, feel it's very urgent that we integrate our psychedelic plant medicine allies as fast as possible for healing up all our trauma, or helping us heal, and stop ricocheting trauma on each other, and get more connected to nature and our authentic selves, and just work towards a globally psychedelically open global citizenry that I think is going to be much better equipped to grapple with and face and deal with the massive environmental and social problems we're facing. I'm also very passionate about ending the drug war, and just the way it's been weaponized against people of color, and and addiction is not a crime. Arresting and incarcerating people, and further traumatizing is not helping anybody or their families or communities. So we were major backers of both measures 110 and 109 in Oregon. We, very much see the power of psychedelic assisted therapy for treating substance use disorders. And we really see Oregon as blazing the path and example for the rest of the country. But what was missing in Oregon was, one of our key allies in the 109 campaign was the Road Cards Project, which sponsors veterans to go down to Peru and other countries in South America to drink ayahuasca together and heal together. And neither 109 or 110 had allowance for the quantities involved in community healing with plant medicines like ayahuasca. So that was always the intent, is with hopeful and now final victories with both those, to then work hard to kind of fill in this missing piece of the policy and allow for people to heal in community, as well as to cultivate their own medicine and sit for each other, and just generally be free in how they approach and engage with the medicine, but in a responsible way, informed by respect and reciprocity to the indigenous traditions that have held these medicines in such high vibration. So we're also big allies of the Indigenous Community Conservation Initiative, and working hard in effort. We're backers of Chacruna's Indigenous Reciprocity Initiative, and really see PMHA as an amazing effort here to decriminalize plant medicines for healing, but doing so in harmony and awareness of the respect owed to these traditions and the real sustainability issues that some of these medicines face, such as toad and 5-MeO and even iboga, although we are decriminalizing, but that's in bad shape, and of course peyote. So just psyched to be here and by this effort. And right on, turn it back to you, Nathan. Thank you.
I am. Thanks so much, David. I think that's the crew. Before we move on to Dr. Hernandez, with kind of going through the intro to us and kind of values, which I think David just teed up really well. Claudia and I were discussing, to give a full kind of context to who we are, going through the rest of our board of advisors. I think maybe instead of doing that, I'm curious what you think, Claudia. Instead of doing that, maybe I'll repost to the full group in case people are curious about who the rest of this group is. If maybe it'll be okay just to share this link and people can look at it while we talk. So for the people who aren't here tonight, what do you think, Claudia?
That sounds really good.
Okay, because that was going to be a lot of reading of people's bios, and I was
agree.
Maybe that's too much. Okay, so for the rest of this crew, that's working, ideally with all of you to advance this kind of missing piece, as David put it. You can check out the link in the chat, the who, and there we go. We're an hour. Now we're ahead of schedule. Sorry, that's my puppy going wild. Yeah, I'm curious, Pilar, if you on the name it shows your full name, Dr. Hernandez. Well, I'm curious, do we want to just go over a little bit about the aspects that David didn't cover? Because I feel like he teed up the context of like why this policy, why should it exist? Do you want to talk a little bit more about some of the kind of aspects like what isn't included in the resolution, and maybe we didn't actually read our mission statement too. I put it in the chat, but maybe kind of.
Let me just go ahead and.
Cool. Okay.
And maybe as I pause, you can chime in. I think that we can just say that like that. Anyway, there's a few ideas that are going to be repetitive, but this kind of repetition, I think it's good because we need to sit with this to remember it. So the Plant Medicine Healing Alliance, what is this? Who are we? We have organized to protect the ceremonial use of plant medicines, to decriminalize fungi and plant medicines for home growing, group healing, and ceremonial and religious purposes. This is what we're about. This is why we're here. This is why this group of very, very different people have come together to work on this. We come from very different backgrounds and have worked very different paths in life. And our paths have crossed at this juncture in which we're here together because we have a common love. And that common love is plant medicines. We love them. That's why we're here. That's the bottom line. It's love. It's love in this relationship between humans and plants. And we want to care for them. So we are proposing an ordinance for the Portland City Council that will acknowledge our relationships with these plants, so that this is visible, that is not covered in hiding anymore. So acknowledgement of the relationships we have with these plants, and that in this acknowledgement, hopefully there will be a contribution to their protection. The policy we propose promotes sustainable sourcing and honoring and reciprocity involving human, animal, and plant ecologies in which the plants medicine grow. Because we are paying attention to the relationships the plants have with other plants and with humans. Because we are paying attention to the histories of the relationships between humans involving medicinal plants, we respect the National Council of the Native American Church's request that we do not include peyote into these measures for decriminalization. It's about relationships, and it's about acknowledging the histories of these relationships, the complexities, the nuances, the challenges of these relationships. So here we are. We do not want to undermine them. Because we acknowledge these ecologies, we're also not including 5-MeO from thought given the precarious situation and ethics involved in this medicine, because we're attending as much as we can to these relationships, to our impact. You have the link to the ordinance in the chat, and we are hoping that decriminalizing these plant medicines in the city of Portland will shift things to allow benefits for the human users and for the plants, so that we continue receiving from the plants, and also that we give back to them in terms of conservation. We can give back to them in terms of respect and in terms of honoring connections between the South and the North of the lands that we call Americas today. This is not only about Portland. This is not only about Americans or a particular section of Americans. This is much bigger than that. This is about all the relationships that we hold in this little microcosmos that we have here. This is a huge step because of that. So we're holding together. Think about this as a basket, and we're weaving this basket, not just here in Portland, we're weaving this basket with our connections at networks in Colombia, in Peru, in Ecuador, in Brazil, in all of the Amazon basin, in Hawaii, and in Puerto Rico, in so many places, because we are all in this part of these webs of connections. So we're holding that space for that. And just to end, I personally joined the Plant Medicine Alliance because my journey of recognition and healing with my ancestors as a mestiza was possible by the traditions and healing plants that were offered to me by some of the indigenous peoples from the land I come from. So to me, the mission of the Plant Medicine Healing Alliance is mindful of all these different ecologies and is in line with the service I want to give at this particular point. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, I think if you're up for it, Rebecca Martinez, would you like to go a little bit more into kind of the goals of the policy considerations? And I think Pilar helped me realize I just need to stop talking sometimes after I ask a question. So I'll stop now.
Yes, thank you. And I love how Pilar just framed this whole thing. I felt that, and it felt like so much of the conversations we've been having all this time has been rooted in that deep heart connection to these medicines. And sometimes that gets lost when we come to advocate for something and we want to just really persuade people to be excited, but coming back to like that deep love and softness that that got us all here it just like has helped me reframe even what I want to speak to. Thank you. So this will just dovetail on things that have already been mentioned today, but there's a number of goals when we were thinking about not only what problems is this resolution seeking to solve, but also what are the deeper goals and considerations. I love that metaphor of the basket weaving together, that this, yes, what we're working on right now is happening in the city of Portland, but this has much more to do with how we're moving as people who are advocating for plant medicines and broader decriminalization. So the first real acknowledgement and goal is to affirm our right to heal in ceremony, and understanding that that is an ancient and deeply human practice that is just an inherent right that we have. And so whatever we can do to return to that for all people and really bring in that justice and access feels really, really important. When we're affirming something, we're also seeking to protect it, you know, and right now there's a lot we have to do to protect these practices that have been forced to the shadows and forced to the margins because of the drug war. Along with that, it feels really important to help increase access and validate and empower the wisdom that falls outside of the Western medical model. It's great that we have research and that the Western paradigms are starting to acknowledge what indigenous cultures have been holding for so long. But it also feels important as we move towards mainstreaming psychedelics, as people like to say, that we're not putting Western medical practices and clinical use above or more important than community-based use, and that we really validate all of the different ways that we heal together and that we practice together, and that this is a right that all people have. And also in trusting that we have among us the folks who can hold the medicine, and that the more that we support them, it's actually better for all of us. Along with that, we've talked about what it is to protect cultivation, understanding that really safe supplies and accessible supplies have a lot to do, and apologies, there's a puppy barking, have a lot to do with community-based growers and cultivators and land tenders who have deep relationships with the medicines and are supplying their immediate communities. We can worry all day about pharmaceutical companies taking over, but when we increase the ability for people to grow their own mushrooms, affordability and access, it becomes a different conversation, or grow their own wachuma and things like that. So protecting cultivation while keeping in mind that there are certain entheogens that need special considerations, which we've talked about in the policy, such as peyote, iboga, and 5-MeO-DMT from toads. In addition to this, something that I think is close to a lot of our hearts is creating safer spaces so that people who have been the most traumatized by existing systems have spaces where they can heal and not be trying to heal while also holding the fear of arrest, prosecution, and incarceration. How do we actually heal from traumas when the fear of being re-traumatized by these very systems is at your doorstep at all times? So even if we can start with one city and ripple out from there, creating as a community a larger, safer space in which we can heal. And then lastly, just in all of this, really seeking as many times as we have to, 100 times a day, coming back to our roots and centering, not only acknowledging indigenous wisdom, but asking ourselves really deeper questions about decolonization and about how we can not only reciprocate monetarily, but in deep, lasting relationships with communities across the global north and global south, and really not only with the human communities, but as has been so beautifully stated, with the plant communities and with the earth that we're trying to protect and defend and get into deeper relationship with. So those are kind of some of the goals and considerations. It's a tall order because we're unlearning a lot, we're learning a lot. We don't yet have the path laid out for us. And so that's why we've focused so much on this being community-based, because we need each other to be accountable, to keep coming back to the roots, and to see where there are blind spots and things we're not yet seeing. So really having an attitude of learners and asking questions all along the way. And I think I will stop there.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. Whoop, whoop, yeah. Raise the roof. Evan, I realized that I didn't see Marka Kazzrie, also from our board of advisors. Marka, would you like to give a brief background? And totally okay if you don't want to, I can share your bio in the chat.
Hey everybody, I'm happy to drop in for just a minute.
Hello.
Hi there. I'm coming at you from the Osage Nation tonight in Oklahoma, where I'm originally from. I do live and work in Portland. This is my home, where I grew up, and my ancestors are from here, and we have a strong peyote tradition in the Osage Nation, and I'm really happy to be here tonight joining you all. to hear your voices. I am recovering from a Delta variant. Got me when supporting my father in the hospital last week. So be careful wherever you go. I'll remind everybody of that. But I'm very happy to be here. I'm feeling all right. I'm happy to be here with you all tonight. I'm a trauma therapist, and I did my training at Native American Health Center in San Francisco back in the day, and I'm two-spirit, non-binary, and I have a long tradition along with my clinical work as a nurse and as a therapist, as working in ayahuasca healing and ceremony, which helped me overcome a lot of trauma from being two-spirit in a Bible Belt where I grew up in the nation. Lots of complexity around that topic. So, but I'm happy to be supporting and more acceptance in our tribe more in the recent years, and have been dropping in with our elders here who are POD practitioners, Native American Church. And I just want to back everything. I've checked everything out with that Indigenous Community Conservation Initiative is sharing about with these elders here about keeping POD out of decriminalization movements right now, as there is federal protection, and it's a complex situation and it's sensitive, and it may not, as the elders here say, it may not always seem fair, and they're really wanting to work together with people, and it's about building relationships and moving slowly over time, and see, it's not about anybody owning POD. It's just about backing and native sovereignty as best we can, as we need to. I think most people in this movement are very supportive of native sovereignty, and so that's for me as being an ally. That's a lot about what it's for. And so just thank you for this opportunity, for being here tonight, and happy to see everybody's faces. Very healing for me, and good to see everybody, and thank you. Yeah.
So good to hear from you, Marka. Thank you so much. All right, for the sake of time, there's a couple more policy considerations, just kind of important nuggets, like the key distinctions of our policy, I think. I'll share those in the chat, maybe during our Q&A, to limit my speaking time too, because I get tired of hearing myself. So I'll plan to share some important info in the chat and go right into the next section of the agenda. So far we've done bios, brief introductions, that is, who we are, intro to the Plant Medicine Healing Alliance, our values, mission, the goals of the policy and considerations, which Rebecca just walked us through. And so before we get to questions and answers, the next item is, what's next for the Plant Medicine Healing Alliance. So you've heard a lot from us as individuals and kind of considerations for our policy. So we've done a lot in about a year, and we've plugged into a lot of efforts, and it's been a really healing group and community, like I know the Portland Psychedelic Society is for a lot of folks. At the same time, we have this very clear mission of trying to bring all the things that all of us on this call care about to Portland City Council. We have five city councilors, 1 mayor, 4 commissioners, and the next phase for us is having another round of meetings. We've met with a lot of their offices, multiple times, and other people in city government. And so the next phase for us, specifically on the policy front, is to have a follow-up set of conversations to update them on what we've been up to, the movement, the really exciting movement we've seen in Seattle and in California, and our Decriminalized Nature friends in Eugene, who are importantly, along with us, respecting the National Council, the Native American Church's request that not include peyote, given its precarious situation in the wild and multi-pronged conservation effort. So we're kind of giving them a bit of education and talking to them and answering questions and talking about, in the context of the city, this is another tool in the toolbox to address mental health, to address the opiate crisis, to push back against the disastrous war on drugs. And ultimately what we're asking them for is to hear the policy at a public hearing. And so that'll be something that all the public will be notified of, and we can line up and talk to city council ahead of that, talk to at a council meeting. So that's the next step for us, continuing to have conversations like this and continuing to refine the policy, which at our latest meeting, we talked about kind of further refining it and making and centering reciprocity further into the actual resolution that we're asking council to consider. That was brought up in our last meeting, which was, I think, a very important conversation and definitely something that guides us. And then it's kind of like TBD. We have those meetings, we're going to ask them to hear the city council, to hear the policy, and then it's kind of go time to try to convince council to take this seriously. The other important consideration is that we've also been in conversations, and maybe Miriam, if you want to talk about this, but I don't want to put you on the spot, with the Tribal Relations Office in the city of Portland, and specifically the Tribal Relations Director, Laura John, and their staff. And part of what's come from there is this discussion of a separate, potentially a separate conversation specifically about honoring the biocultural heritage of peyote. So that's kind of another big item TBD that we're waiting for information on in terms of when it would be heard at council, let alone when it would be voted on. Miriam, should I leave it at that, or do you want to talk about that aspect some?
Well, I can just share that the Tribal Relations Office in Portland, that has 7 different tribes that they're responsible for representing, has agreed to spend time out in the communities with representatives from those 7 tribes to assess their perspective on decriminalization, peyote, and where and how it should or shouldn't be included in the Portland effort, at least. And then, and it's just really wonderful that Tribal Relations is taking that on, because it's a very appropriate body to do that when dealing with a regulatory shift. And so we've just been really supportive of that, and looking forward to seeing what they find out in the communities. So I think it's a good way for us to all look at these things going in the future as well. Yeah.
Thank you, Miriam. So yeah, it's a little bit ambiguous, but it's like, what's next? Well, we're meeting with city council again and asking them to hear the policy. And then once it's scheduled, you'll be hearing from us all again, hopefully, and Portland will show up. Did I cover that well? Is that I feel like I want to offer more, but that's really just it. So that leaves us with a good amount of time for questions and answers. Should we discuss anything else before we move on, or does that feel good, team? Did I miss anything? Did we miss anything? Did I miss the agenda? I feel like people are giving me looks that make me feel okay, that we can move on. All right, Evan, just a reminder. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry to interject. I wonder if you could sort of lay out for folks who aren't familiar with resolutions being passed this way, like what the general process tends to be like. I know we're sort of in like a hurry up and wait situation sometimes, but I think that would be helpful. Like what does it mean for having a public hearing, or how is this different from putting something on a ballot initiative? Could you speak to that?
Yeah, I like getting into that stuff. Does somebody else want to answer that? Otherwise, I'm happy to speak to my experience working in the city of Portland on that. I'm looking to see people's faces if they want to talk about it. Okay, I'm going to go. Great question, Rebecca. So, so just kind of like the quick overview. So Portland City Council is made up of 5 people. There's, they're all commissioners. One's a mayor. We have a weak mayor system, which, people may feel that way about the person who holds the mayor, but really what that just means is the actual system of government means that he has the The mayor has no special powers. The only thing they can do that's different is they can assign bureaus and set the first budget draft. And so when things come up for a vote, the votes are all equal. So to pass something in Portland City Council, you need 3 votes. Ideally, something like what we're talking about should be unanimous, especially to help send a signal to other cities and to the state of Oregon after this, that this is unequivocally the right thing to do. This is moving forward. So what we're asking for is a public hearing for a resolution. That usually happens on anything, especially something that people want to talk about. And there can be infinite public hearings, but usually there's a couple, and then it comes up for a vote. This happens for both resolutions and ordinances. Resolutions are, well, I won't get into the nuance between those two, but like ordinance is like really hard, like you're changing city code. It's usually having to do with amending the charter. A resolution would be something like what we're asking for, which is a directive to make, decriminalizing and enforcing anything related to home cultivation or gifting or ceremonies the least enforcement priority. And so given the subject matter, it goes into this kind of more of a kind of stance and culture shift in the city. That's a resolution. But regardless of whether it's a resolution or ordinance, it needs 5 votes. After a public hearing or multitude of public hearings, usually there's then deliberations within city council. That's really, it's a completely undefined process. And then once the city council and the staff feel good, they know how people will vote, then they'll schedule it for a vote. And that's when it's heard, and ideally a 5-0 vote. There's no real rules around how long something should take. When we ask them for a public hearing and to pass this, they're not obligated to. That's what elections are for. So it's kind of a, definitely an arcane process, in part by design. But the general idea is, you draft it, the city attorney tells you you're not breaking any laws, and then council can go on and hear it. Did I miss anything in there, Becca? Okay. Seems so dry. I feel like that's an unsatisfactory answer, but that's essentially it. We've got questions flowing in. I'm gonna mute myself.
Thanks for clarifying that, Nathan, and for bringing it up, Rebecca. So I'm going to go ahead and just start reading the questions from the top. And anyone from the PMHA team, feel free to chime in. So Peter Addy asked a question earlier. They asked, why are you focusing on psychedelics instead of all psychoactive plants? He also added, thank you so much. I'm going to repeat that question. Why is PMHA focusing on psychedelics instead of all psychoactive plants?
Who wants to take that one?
Let me just insert at this point that I can't spotlight all of the board members, and that way you can have more of a visual cue, or we can just leave it the way it is. Because I'm doing the recording and right now I have it on speaker view.
I think speaker view is okay. Thank you, Kazzrie. David, you're going to say something?
Yeah, is the question meaning like coca and opium and like everything else that basically has any type of drug effect, quote unquote psychoactive effect? Assuming so. I wrote a blog recently called Towards a More Rational, Compassionate Drug Policy, and big fan of Carl Hart, professor at Columbia, who's got a very cogent critique of the drug war. And I think maybe the question's aimed at psychedelic exceptionalism. But yeah, I think all classes of drugs are exceptional. Stimulants have their, qualities, really amazing qualities, but also their shadow. Opiates have their amazing qualities in the shadow. Psychedelics have their amazing qualities in the shadow. But yeah, I think we're, focusing on integrating psychedelics for those amazing qualities of healing and connection. And we've already got Measure 110 that decriminalizes everything. So what's missing is the ceremonial quantity to be, to be able to cultivate and gift and heal with quantities of plant medicine that are currently not allowed under 110 because the cutoffs are so low. So I think that's the primary focus.
Thanks, David. Would anyone else like to chime in?
Yeah, I'll just also say that, when working with municipalities, you also got to be strategic. We have the opportunity to ride the tailwind of Measure 110 and Measure 109 here. City Council's prepared to have conversations around psychedelics. So, where we started with cannabis, which is an entheogen, now we get to talk about psychedelics more broadly with Measure 109 leading the way. And I think that's palatable. So I think this is an area where we can really move the needle and begin destigmatizing the conversation, not just the plants, right? But destigmatizing the conversation so that we can demonstrate the opportunity and really the power of the opportunity to create enrichment opportunities for the community. I think that'll be very powerful for City Council to witness, but one step at a time. Governments move so slowly. So it's really remarkable that they have been responsive to us. And we want to make sure that we're good stewards over this conversation with them.
Thank you, Rachel, so much. Anyone else? All right, I'm going to go ahead and bring us to our next question from Zach. Theoretically, if a mycology cooperative in Portland had a physical space, would they be able to teach methods of cultivation with psilocybin mushrooms? I'm going to go ahead and answer that one because we have experience with that at the Portland Psychedelic Society, and I teach people how to cultivate. Education is not illegal right now, so the answer is yes, Zach. Next question, David Heigl. I understand the importance of focusing upon specific goals, but has there been any thought or conversation around positioning PMHA within the larger abolitionist movement? It's a good question. Thank you, David.
To be honest, I don't necessarily know that I understand the question.
I'm happy to speak on this at least briefly. If I understand the question, for those who aren't familiar with the abolitionist movement, to sum up, it's really a movement to move from a punitive society to one that is more deeply understanding of things that help and things that harm and things that heal. So focusing on solutions that don't involve incarcerating people and enslaving them in prisons and the whole judicial system as we know it. So I think there are many in the group who feel strongly towards those goals. I think it's a conversation that we'll definitely be following up and having. I can't say that we've really framed things within an abolitionist perspective so far, beyond sort of what we've talked about in terms of, I think we all feel strongly about ending the drug war, and which is a huge piece of the abolitionist movement. Hope that helps.
Thank you, Rebecca.
That I was just gonna say that feels right to me. It's not, it isn't absolutely front and center, but it feels like it's part of it. And I like what you said, Rebecca. More conversation along those lines are probably going to ensue.
Absolutely. Question from Janet. Do you think that the production of plant medicines will be closely monitored in Oregon as has been done with marijuana? For example, tagging and tracking plants from cultivation to distribution.
I'll take this.
I hope not.
Yeah, I'll take this one. No, unless it's a regulated substance like cannabis and now psilocybin, right? So if there is an intent to participate commercially, right, transact using economic capital, then absolutely to be lawful or to operate in a legal manner? Yeah. So the answer is yes. And right now, the only entheogens, right, earth medicines that are being regulated are cannabis and psilocybin. So everything else here, we're saying will be deprioritized, meaning no, they're not regulated. They will not have to be subject to tracking and tracing at all. Then there's no mechanism to do that, right? So there would be no way to enforce it either outside of them, subjectively enforcing what we want to avoid. So I do think there's an echo. I don't know if that's because of me.
No, that was because of David, but I'm gonna mute you, David.
Okay.
Sorry, go ahead, Rick.
So what the community will need to understand is that, right? This is the non-commercial use of plant medicines. And that would be the social contract we enter into with the city for them to agree to deprioritize. And so that's something, like I said, that the community will need to be made aware of and to guard against and protect against.
I want to add a thought about this as I hear you, Rachel, and it has to do with highlighting that non-commercial use. To me, that is essential in order to allow ourselves to really rethink and enact relationships between us and between us in the plants that model care for each other. I think if that's very important protection, that ceremonial use requires that there is that protection.
And I was just going to add that the mushrooms, outside of the 109, that has a self-regulating measures for psilocybin production, distribution, facilitated use. But outside of that, mushrooms would be, in the same, grow your own, for your friends and community and churches, and healing ceremony. And so long as there's not economic transaction, it's it's just outside of regulation.
Thanks, David. Anyone else have anything to add?
If I could speak to that for a moment. Can you hear me?
Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, there's, what we're doing is creating a huge gray area. I completely 100% support everything that we're doing with this initiative in Portland. There is a kind of a checkered flag down across the state of Oregon right now. And everybody and their cousin is rushing off to their barn to grow mushrooms. There is it's built into it. It's how do we provide a voice? The voices that we're hearing tonight are the voices that need to be heard loud and clearly about why we're doing this. And there will be commercial interests, and there are commercial interests. And when investors from Canada and so forth come to me and say, well, what's the next big thing, Mike? We want in on it. I go, this is not the next cannabis. We have to treat this in a different way. And I'm sorry, fellas, this is not going to be that. So somehow we have to thread our way through a very large gray area. And just for a moment, put ourselves into the regulators' shoes, in their moccasins, and see what it is that they're looking at this whole thing. I think it is really helpful not only to be an advocate, but to put ourselves into the perspective of the other folks who are trying to figure out how this is going to work for. And I always like to hold my DEA guys to their, you're here for public health. Let's look at public health first and foremost. At the end of the day, that's why you're doing what you're doing, not to beat people up, but to guard the welfare of the greater good, yeah?
In theory. Thank you, Mike.
Yeah, I'll just say that the purpose of tracking and tracing, right, is can be varied, but principally for a regulatory authority, they care about chain of custody. They are ultimately responsible for ensuring the integrity of product so that the end consumer is safe. And they care about diversion, right? They care that products aren't getting leaked out into the unregulated market for a number of reasons, but I think principally it's, tax evasion and those sorts of things. Right, the history of the war on drugs began with the federal government caring that folks who are commercially transacting with these quote unquote drugs were evading taxes. So again, for our community, it's going to be important to avoid the commercial use, really to hold up our end of again, that social contract we would be making with the city. Right. Otherwise, yeah, we would be subject to all the regulations and licensing structures, et cetera, that might eventually be put into place.
Totally agree, Rachel. Totally agree.
Thank you for clarifying that, Rachel, too. And thank you, Mike. I'm going to go ahead and bring us to the next question, which is from Kian. Kian says, yeah, my question is similar to Peter's. Sorry, why is the policy excluding certain things like peyote cactus? And we touched on this earlier. Rebecca did explain that there are environmental concerns pertaining to the existence of the peyote cactus and the 5-MeO-DMT extracted from Sonoran desert toads, and also iboga from one source, but not others, as I'm aware. But if anyone would like to add anything else onto that, then please feel free to unmute yourself.
While folks unmute to speak, I'm going to paste a couple kind of kernels on this question in the chat for review.
Yeah, I think we can just go to the next question. I think I covered it. So
well, that'll be the least amount of time on this. It's a biggie and super important. Maybe Evan, if it's okay, maybe we can hear from one person on this, just because it's an important aspect.
Absolutely, yeah. Anyone, please feel free to unmute.
I can just briefly say then, is there an echo? Can you hear me? Good. Well, this is, again, I mean, this goes back to what Pilar was speaking about our mission. This is about relationships. The NAC has asked specifically that peyote is protected. And we are here honoring relationships, doing reparative work. This is our intention, to be in right relationship with everyone and everything around us. We humans are not the center of everything. We're here working with plant medicines. So it is an honor to acknowledge the request of the NAC and to continue working in solidarity and mutual reciprocity in regards to these medicine plants and in regards to the healing history we need to tend to. Trauma comes from deep injustices that our communities have gone through centuries. And we here in the United States, in the Northern Hemisphere, have the responsibility to be aware at this time of all those historical contexts and are colliding and creating the repetition of oppressive systems. We have to listen. We have to listen to these plant medicines. We have to listen to our native First Nation people that are requesting, we need you to give us a space to tend to these plant medicine peyote as we know how to. And we are saying, of course, yes, because this is not just about peyote in itself. It's about relationship. It's about repairing. It's about coming together and listening to one another and leading by example. So this is us leading by example.
Thank you, Claudia. All right, our next question from Allison, and her question is, how is this resolution as a local city initiative different from other symbolic political gestures that we've seen other plant medicine organizations put forward in the past?
I'll give a brief beginning answer to that. I wasn't sure if we'd get to Allison's question because there's been a lot. So Allison, did you get my responses to you? Sometimes I wonder if I'm using chat right. Okay, I'll just read my quick kind of nugget responses to Allison, and people can add on to that. But I sent to Allison, great question. This was one of my first kind of initial questions as well, with kind of my policy hat on. I used to work in City Hall for a bit, and it was really interesting. We got from most of the staff in City Council, this was one of their first questions too, because when you see the framework of the policy, and you know that the driver of incarceration or arrests isn't the criminalization, at least in Portland, of the entheogens we're talking about, the psychedelics, with the exclusion of peyote and 5-MeO. Their answer was, their kind of response was, well, what's the urgency? Why? Like, what is the problem you're trying to solve? So what I sent to Allison, and we can build on this, is that there's a few, big, tangible and non-symbolic reasons why we want to pass this, and why it's versions of this is passed around the country. First is the idea for people on the ground in Portland is that it can allow ceremonies and practitioners to further come above ground. And that's not saying someone should, or even they will. This is more of like a hope that there's more protections by saying this is a least enforcement priority. No city resources can be used to criminalize or enforce any rules around home cultivation or ceremonial use or gifting. So part of that is around access and just creating a more accepting culture. And the very real impact it could have on people if we start to see more ceremonies and practices come above ground is that for friends, and I'm sure we all have stories like this of ours who are vets or who are seeking ceremony or these medicines, we're often at least friends that I know, and I'm sure folks can speak to this intimately, is they are flying to other parts of the country or elsewhere, which is a whole another conversation we can have about what that means for reciprocity. But the idea is that we can create more access in Portland, especially for people who don't happen to have friends who practice these medicines. And then the second aspect is that, in Portland, it is not a big driver of incarceration. It's not as much of an issue. That changes state to state. And so this is ideally something that we want to see move to the state and also move across the country and eventually impact federal policy. And so in a way, it's a template for our state and for other cities and states. And the important aspect to that, to the previous question, is that we're proposing something that is in harmony with the Native American Church, indigenous leadership, and allies. And so there are, reasons why there is the real urgency. It's the same reason why we believe that our mental health crisis is urgent, and addressing the opioid epidemic is urgent. So it's an excellent question, one we got from most of the council, and I was not short in my response there. But those are the main ways that I've kind of grappled with that question. Like, how is this more than just symbolic? Very curious to hear others' take.
I think I'm going to go ahead and go to the next question.
Okay.
We do have a lot. I don't know if we'll make it to all of these before the end, but the next question from Kazzrie: will the initiative specify amount limits or be simple decriminalization of specific plants/medicines? Specifying limits seems to be a charged, quote unquote, big difference point that people have concerns about. Thanks, Kazzrie.
Well, I mean, I can jump. Yeah, there's no limits in the proposal. And that's, there is no difference in that. I think maybe the concern might be California, where our legislative champion introduced the decrim bill for personal use, which by definition has whatever. We were trying to keep it unspecified, but it was never meant unlimited. We wanted to allow people to make the case for whatever quantities they had or personal use without specification. But the con side of that is you get the wrong judge, and they can interpret that quote unquote personal use more strictly than otherwise. Personal use versus distribution quantities. So in California, like we were forced to define personal use limits, and we're not created controversy. But there was never a version of the bill that allowed quote unquote unlimited amounts, and that's just misinformation. But the measure here that PMHA is putting forward is no reference to personal amounts, personal use amounts. It's just a straight decrim measure.
Got it.
And we're not working. Yeah, so.
Thank you, David. Rebecca?
Yeah, just one note. Some of the early language had said that the mission was to decriminalize entheogens and plant medicines in amounts sufficient for growing, gifting, and group use. And just to clarify, I think that's where some of the questions came in early on. We've since clarified that language, but that was really more so in the spirit of building upon what Measure 10 was able to accomplish, which was a certain level of decriminalization, but the amounts were so small. So it was really to say, okay, there's more to be done here. We need people to be allowed to use the amounts that are needed in group ceremony. So the language was a little confusing, but the spirit and the way the bill's written is very much without limits.
Thank you, Rebecca. On to the next question from Carolyn Fine. This is a two-part question. So the first question is, will folks need to have documentation or some way to quote unquote prove that they're working in a religious or ceremonial context? I'll stop there.
David. No, the language says it's straight decrim, but then it just notes it uses language especially for ceremonial healing, but it's a straight decrim, so you can go run around in the forest and you can do whatever you want, go to the Grateful Dead or vetting company. It's not about just ceremonial healing.
No, just want to share that at the Chacruna Institute, that, as I said, I consider a sister organization to the Plant Medicine Healing Alliance. We're focused on creating a church guide, which is trying to teach folks about religious freedom restoration acts and how you can document the practices that you share in your community, in your church, in ways that would make sense in terms of the current legislation, and also just how to keep track of your sacrament and diversion, and how to report on the books or pay taxes, and create an organization that has best practices. So I think that independent on the legislation per se, it's within the interest of communities to organize themselves with best practices and create proper protocols with preparation and integration, and just the whole arc of ethics, accountability, and what do you do if things go wrong on the ground. So a lot of things, I think it's not just about what passes or not passes, but it's within our interest as communities to self-regulate and to foster a culture of practices that are safe and ethical, accountable, that are community oriented, that are based on the land with ideas of reciprocity. So I just want to make, a plug that all we're talking here is not about just passing legislations, but about creating this unity among all of us that are, as Pilar said, so nice. And I really love that she opened up. We're here because we like these plants and we love them and they're teachers. And, we're here because we've been touched in our hearts. And so that's why we're doing this work, not the other way around. Different than some opportunists that arrived yesterday, but a lot of us that have been doing the work for a long time is because we like it and it means a lot to us. So it's up to us to create this practices as communities. And that's why I like this project. And that's why I'm, also sitting on the board, because I feel it's sincere for people that care for the plants. And so I just want to, suggest to everybody that we have to create this, and we have been creating this, and people that are serious have been creating this before, and will continue doing independent of what passes or not passes, because doing it right is the right thing, right? Like when you're sitting on a ceremony, if the shaman goes to the restroom, you're not going to run and catch the ayahuasca and drink fast because he's not looking. I mean, maybe somebody does that, but we're trained to act right because we are trained to do things right, because that's the right way to do things. And, we're just like showing the authorities that we're already doing things right. They just don't know. And so it's about creating this communal, container for all of us. We like to say in Chacruna that it's not just about the integration of psychological narratives, but the integration of these plants into our communities, into our societies, as legitimate friends and allies and relatives, and not as this demoniac, pathological, artificial illusion, hallucinogen kind of thing. I'm so curious to know. I know that I'm a bit, I am the gringo here. I am from the Bay Area, and I'm also a foreigner. I would really just like to ask the people there from the organization of this group, Evan or the other person that I forgot her name, if you had to summarize, like, how vibrant is the plant medicine community in Portland? Do you think there's, like, how many circles do you think exist of ayahuasca or mushrooms, or how strong is this movement in the ground, in your opinion?
Yeah, first I just want to say thank you, Bia, because all of the words that you just shared were so beautiful and really got me excited. I'm just so honored to be here with you all and to be doing this type of work above ground and fighting to make these things more accessible for people that don't have access the ways that people on this meeting have had, or at least that I assume that they have had. And to answer your second question, I think that the communities here are strong. I think it's interesting that the ways that they are kind of layered, and some don't seem to interact with others. Some do a very, very good job at remaining underground. And that's their protection in a way, right? And that's what I think PMHA is trying to help do, is allow them to not feel the need to protect themselves so fiercely. But I think it's just kind of obvious, if Portland was not a epicenter and a strong community intertwined with plant medicine, then we would all not be here right now. I think there's so many people in Oregon that care so deeply about plant medicine, and like I said, it's just an honor to be here and to be working with them and with you all. So thank you. Yeah, thank you for asking.
Thank you, buddy. It's a pleasure to meet here on this strange modern forum.
Thanks, Mike. So I'm going to quickly interject here and just say that we are a little over an hour and a half into this meeting, and on Meetup we set it for 2 hours, but usually Portland Psychedelic Society meetings only go for an hour and a half, and I believe that's what the PMHA crew was expecting. So I want to pause here, allow everyone to, leave at this point if exhausted and to not feel bad about it. We have probably about, I think, 9 or 10 more questions to go through, and I think like the past 10 minutes, they will just keep coming as these conversations ensue. But I also want to just take a moment to thank everyone again for being here. We really appreciate your participation. And if you could fill out our Zoom event feedback survey, our friend Kazzrie has just reposted the links to everything in the chat box. And I will also ask again, if you found this meeting helpful, to please consider donating to the Portland Psychedelic Society. We're a completely volunteer-run nonprofit organization here in Portland, and everyone within our organization just works because they are passionate and inspired by plant medicines and want to help create more access to education, to support, to integration circles around these things. We're here for the Portland community, and we want to continue being able to support that. So if you're able to, the donation link is also in the chat. And also, if you want to help us with time or energy, we would love for you to volunteer with our team. So the links are all there. If you've got to take off, have a beautiful night. Thank you for joining us. And yeah, I am curious to hear how the PMHA team feels about continuing asking questions. We are halfway through Carolyn Fine's 2 questions. So
they don't call them the Portland Trailblazers for nothing.
Thanks, Mike.
That was a good chuckle. I'm game. I think folks should feel comfortable. It's 8:40, at least PST, maybe later elsewhere. I think if folks want to head off, that's fine. I'm game to stick around for a bit longer. I'm also going to capture everyone's questions and do my best to answer them, or rather compile them and share them with the PMHA Slack, and maybe we can collectively answer them and then maybe get them back to you, Evan, to share with folks. It's a bit of work, but it's not like the Indigenous Peyote Conservation Initiative webinar where they got, I think, 300 questions, then they answered all of them individually, or at least most of them.
Yeah, and one, depending on how long the questions and answers are, it can go in, because this video will get posted on YouTube, and there's a description which can be pretty long. It can't be forever long, but yeah, some of those Q&A could go there. And I put an ask in the chat for those of you on the board. If you would like, we'll have the link to the PMHA information. If you want your individual contact information or whatever, let me know and I will include that.
Awesome. Thank you. Let's keep going, Evan. Let's go all night, you know? Get that salsa music going.
All night.
All right. Do we want to slide over to unmute Connor and have him he looks like he wants to say something.
Connor, if you wouldn't mind putting it in the chat, we're going to try to keep like the order of questions that have come in so far. Thanks, buddy. The second question from Carolyn Fine was, what sort of impact do you think this resolution will have on the pursuit of licensure under 109 outside of therapists and doctors who need the legal framework?
I think it's going to bolster it. I think it will galvanize folks who want to participate in the program to do so. And that's important. I think what's most important is the agency this resolution would create for folks to have a choice, to enter it into this sort of commercial market, which is what this program creates, right? It creates a demand, or the demand will create a supply chain, right? So there is a commercial opportunity for folks here. We have to be honest about that. But like I said, it gives people an option to participate meaningfully to a program that will be monitored to the degree that we can glean insights around impact. Hopefully, you know, in 3, 4, 5, 10, 20 years, we'll be able to say, wow, this program made a difference. And I think that'll be important for people who want to operate as an operator in the supply chain or as a facilitator to be a part of that. But we need to make sure too that we create clear opportunities for the transaction of enrichment and education and sharing of experience, so that this program, right, this regulated program, can learn from community as much as our community can learn from this program. So we're going to need to really encourage this sort of inside, outside, outside, inside game here, I think, to truly serve all stakeholders here, right? There are going to be people who come to entheogens through the regulated market, and that is okay, if that's the access that they're going to trust. And then we have folks who are not going to want to touch this program with a 10-foot pole, and that is their right to do so. So in my opinion, we're just creating spaces for all people to thrive in.
Beautiful.
Yes.
Thank you, Rachel. Mike, you got anything else to share? Or are you just excited?
I'm just excited, Evan. It's coming from a few directions. I mean, since history's on our side, there's a huge amount of pressure behind history right now that is going to express itself in a few different ways. And I really love the way this group and you are doing what we're doing together. Just really aiming for the heart of the matter. Why we're doing this. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, Mike.
I think this is also going to open spaces for religious freedom. And to me, it's not really the word religious is the most accurate. It's actually about spiritual freedom. This is extremely important. This is this is what philosophically we would call a paradigmatic shift, a spiritual freedom in this way that involves the creation of whatever meld of traditions is going to evolve from what will happen here. It's an opportunity, and it will allow practices that will be visible, involving plants and ceremonial practices that are just not seen here.
Thank you, Pilar. All right, our next question is from Allison again, and the question is, what will PMHA do to ensure that the wealth of these medicines and these ceremonies is equitably shared with indigenous communities and other healers and growers within the Portland community?
That is a very important question. Thank you for asking that. We're actually discussing it. So it's awesome you're asking it. This is not, this is an ongoing conversation. We've been talking about this actually since I joined the board. So it's not a new question. It has multiple answers, and the answers also change over time and depending on the context. And we're in the thick of it. We're talking about it in our meeting on Monday. I don't have a definite answer except to say that, yes, we are all engaged into thinking how to do this.
Yes.
Yes, and I will add too, it's kind of cool that the board has such significant intersection, right, with respect to Dr. Carter's involvement with Measure 110 and many of our involvement with Measure 109, the efforts we're trying to do with the city, right, the city council. It's going to matter that we don't do this alone, is my point. And it's going to matter that we're having conversations with the agencies and institutions that have been entrusted to steward programs that have a role to play in creating that equitable access to the communities that are most divested, right? So I see our role very much as being facilitators of those conversations too, and where we have influence, whether like Dr. Carter, we have been hired to lead a program, or if we sit on advisory boards, it is our job to convene together like we're doing right now, pull our insights together, and then take those insights back into those spaces so that we are assuring that we are taking a 360-degree approach to this effort, bringing in stakeholders from the corporate sector, right, the private sector, the public sector with these bureaus and agencies, and then most importantly, community, so that together we're coming up with solutions that will make sense for us.
Yeah, I just want to really echo what Rachel said, and nice meeting you, Rachel, and thanks for that article that you wrote. I thought you were much older. It's nice to meet new friends through the screen. That I don't think that there's fixed answers for this kind of thing necessarily, like that's what you got to do, but there is the need for process. And I think that's what has been largely missing in the psychedelic movement. Is just like the idea that you have to listen to Native Americans and that you have to bring different people to the table and have a conversation together and build things. It's kind of obvious, right? It seems very simple, but it's not what's been done so far, to the point that the Native American Church has issued a letter to the psychedelic movement asking for people to hear them. And so I think that more than like, this is it, I think what's nice about this group, and I echo what Pilar is saying as well, is that there is an intention for creating proper process to create the dialogues that will build the solutions together. And that I think is innovative about this group. And that's also why I like it.
Yes, we get to determine what proper means.
Right on. Thank you, Rachel, and thank you, Bia.
It's such a good question. Thanks for asking it. And yeah, to Dr. Hernandez's point, this last meeting that we had on Monday, yesterday, Pilar brought this back up, and because we've talked about it in the past, but the thing that I feel like was awesome about yesterday's meeting is that we're like, well, what does it actually mean? What are the actions? Like, how does it manifest? And how can we further center it? And so, yeah, very timely and topical. I just brought up yesterday. And Bia, would you be willing to put in the chat the best resource for the reciprocity initiative that you shared? I want to make sure I don't share the wrong link, but I feel like that was a really awesome resource for me to understand, like, okay, well, what does this actually entail?
Are you talking about the Indigenous Reciprocity Initiative?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. I'll share that. I also want to tell everybody that we're going to do an event tomorrow, and I really want to invite my Latin sisters here, especially Claudia, Rebecca, and Pilar. It's called Latinx movement or something and plant medicines. So it's talking about this intersection between being Latin and using plant medicines, and how being mestizo is not the same as being indigenous, but mestizo people are oppressed as well. And how do we deal with this multiple oppressions, indigenous, mestizo, plant medicine. And so I want to invite everybody to join that tomorrow. And I also want to invite everybody we are organizing a meeting with David Bronner, Ismail Ali, and Reggie and Monica Cadena from SPORE, and Danielle Negrin from Psychedelic San Francisco Society about this California bill, SB 519, and would invite everybody to come and join us. And I want to give a shout out for the Portland Psychedelic Society for organizing this, and the care which you held your event with this very guided and structured guidelines. As a co-fellow organizer, I appreciate the care and the professionalism, and I hope that we can strengthen our ties as community, because as we were saying, this is an ongoing process. So I think it's an ongoing conversation. and everybody's invited to join this. And it's so important to create forums like this where we can build these connections and these friendships. And I just really want also to give a shout out to David Bronner, as his company has donated, I believe, $7.5 million for activism in the psychedelic space and elsewhere last year. So I just think that he deserves a lot of applauses because he has a big heart and is a big friend of this community.
Good here. I just donated $55.
And everybody should donate to the organizers too, because we know how it is to try to have grassroots orgs and scramble for funds.
Totally. Thank you so much, Bia. And thank you, David, as well, for all that you're doing. And especially thank you, Nathan, for that $55. That's actually all of the questions that we got. There's plenty of comments and tons of thank yous to everyone on the whole PMH team that has come through and supported our community with your presence and information and opinions and wisdom tonight. So thank you, every single one of you, so much for showing up and for doing the work that you're doing for our community. And for I just kind of want to end on this note, and it's one of the most important things to me about all this work going on, and that is to think about not only our community and the ways that we are impacting it now and within the next, couple years as we see the successes and the fruits of our labor, but generations and generations of humans to come that will grow up in an Oregon that will allow them to experience the types of healing that we have been granted and be able to do so in a safe and supportive environment. And I think that's probably one of the most important things that motivates me to continue doing this work, is just to imagine what that world looks like. And I'm just so grateful for you all to help and assist and make that dream happen. So thanks so much, everyone, for being here.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.